Hi, morning everyone. Yeah, welcome to this sessions, Agile Project Management for Data Analytics. So my name is Mei. For today, I will share some knowledge on project management for data analytics. So before I start, I would just like to introduce myself. I'm managing a lot of data analytics projects across different countries. And all these projects are managed using Agile project management. And of course, with a framework that is being used for a data mining framework. So today's sessions, I will go through all this so that everyone can understand the end-to-end data flow of these data analytics projects. So just would like to share my experience on managing this data analytics project that is from different industries, start from food and beverage, and then the manufacturing and others industry as well. So our today focus will be on understanding the data analytics life cycle. The project life cycle, of course, to understand the end-to-end project life cycles. The Agile methodology, which is how are we going to manage the client's expectation, which is coming in very frequent. And of course, what are the tools that can help us to manage this project well so that we can ensure all the projects can run on time, run smoothly, and also at the same time to meet clients' expectation. So if you have any questions, then you can actually type it out so that I can view from there and then answers your questions. So of course, at the last stage of our session today, of course, we have a Q&A session. But if you have any other questions during the sessions that I'm sharing, then you can type it out so that I can view from that. Yeah, so before we start our sessions talking about all these project managements and how we are going to manage these end-to-end data analytics projects, let's have some warm-up first. So you can open this www.menti.com and then key in the code so that we can have a warm-up before we kickstart. And then also at the same time, let me understand that your understanding about Agile. Yeah, start to key in, and then later we share screens like what other people think about Agile. So just leave your thoughts what do you think about Agile before we kickstart on managing these data analytics projects. And Agile is very, very important for all these projects. So you can actually type in there and then I will share from here to let you guys have a look. Yeah, we can see a lot of people start typing. So of course, there's 3 words for you to type, right? Then so you just type in anything that comes into your mind. So I can see that the flexible is the biggest word, means that everyone's thing about Agile is about flexible, quick, fast, change quickly. And then of course, we think about sprint. So what do you mean by sprint? So later we can have a look on the process of this Agile methodology. And then most importantly, people are thinking about Agile is about flexibility, and then communications comes into your mind as well, because for Agiles, we keep getting new requirement and all this. And then we can see from the word cloud over here, so it's a flexible, quick, and fast is the main things. Yeah, and then keep adding, and then I just take now 1 more minute to get all this feedback, and then we will start our sessions today. Yeah, so prototyping, building something that's with a very small scope, and then to roll out. And as we can see, the iterative, yeah, this is the keywords of Agile project management, because we are getting a lot of new requirements. Adjustable, not rigid, yes. And then someone's typing like small, effective, yeah, considering it very effective. If you are trying to come up with some things that is usable at the very beginning within a very short period. And Agile project management is a very good tool, basically a guideline for you to understand on how to kickstart. Yeah. Yeah, finish your last updates and then we'll start our sessions. Yeah, I think most of them already there. Yeah, we can see that flexible, quick, and fast is the main thing. Yeah, so let me share my screen again. Yeah, we are back to our session today. Yeah, so just now we have already have a warm up. So basically, let you know that what is Agile and then what your thoughts about Agile. So now as we come to this understandings, what is project management? So we everyone know that manage a project without a project management is just like trying to play a football game without a game plan. Meaning that when you manage a project without a strategy, it's like you don't know how to start and you don't know how to actually work on it and then to win the game. So for the football, I use the football as an example, and it's also a framework quote by a lot of project management practitioners. It's about coming up with strategies. You just like you know your goal, so how to achieve your goal. So you need to have a proper strategy to it. So you need to have a proper plan. So for all the data analytics project, of course, we have a very different goal. Like for example, you want to do some predictions or you want to have a very basic dashboarding just to monitor some metrics. So all this is your goal to actually work on it. So you need to have a proper plan so that you are able to achieve the objective that you would like to achieve. So for these sessions, I will go through these project management frameworks that is work best for data analytics project. So before we move on to the key things, what are the project management frameworks best for data analytics? What do you think? So maybe you can type in the chat box like, what are the framework that you can think of? Is it just the Agile project management? Or do you come across any framework that is specifically for a data analytics project? Yeah, type in the comments. What are some of the frameworks that you can think of? Yeah, feel free to drop your questions. Yeah, before we start, so just write out your what do you think about project management? Is it just agile project management framework, or do they have a name for this that works best for analytics project? Yeah, sprint. So I saw Qingye saying sprint, Scrum. Yeah, so this is the agile framework, but how do you manage these data analytics projects? Do you think of like combinations of several framework on this? Yeah, so I will just wait another few seconds and I will give you the answers what works best, which is a framework that we are practicing it. We are practicing it basically to do our all our data related projects, which is we do data migrations, we do a dashboarding, we do all this data visualizations, helping the customer to build a dashboard, helping the customer to do predictions dashboard. Yeah, do only later we see framework. Yeah. So we saw someone that plan, execute, measure. Yeah, this is a proper flow of it. So this proper flow is actually we called it a projects life cycles. We do have like planning and then after we plan, then we execute. So I saw a few people also saying that's a sprint, Scrum. Yeah. So now I let you know what is works best for a data analytics project. So all the comments right now, right, you can see that we talk about Sprint, Agile. So this is all the Agile project management method. So when we want to plan a project, of course, we want to have a proper planning, and then we want to execute it, and then monitor it, and then of course we have a closing stage. So this is about the project life cycle. So when we do on a data analytics project, we do have a framework. We call this a Crypts DM. So from here, you can see that it's a cross-industrial standards for data, standard process for data mining. So this is a framework that actually gives us an overview of how these data life cycles look like. And then with this data life cycle, we will have our Agile project management to help us to actually managing the team. So before we have a look on how these two things is being combined and applied to our data analytics projects, we will first look into Crypts DM, which is for all the data science, data analytics projects. We'll look into this Crypts DM. So we call it a cross-industrial standard process for data mining. So you can see that there is basically a cycle that consists of 6 phases. Yeah, so we look at the first one, it's about the business understanding. So when we talk about business understanding, it's about understanding your goal and then what is the objective, why you want to do this. So based on this business understanding, we come up with a plan. So this is, we call it the first stage. So every data analytics project will go through this. So after we get our objective and then we move to the next stage, we call it a data understanding. So data understanding is based on the question itself, and as you come up with some hypotheses and you think that, yeah, what kind of data that is needed. So this stage, you will need to collect your data and then describe your data. So basically you do the exploratory analysis to understand more about what kind of data that you are having and then what kind of data that you have already collected and you're planning to use for your next step. So with all this, of course, you need to govern the data quality as well. So with all the data understanding, now you come to a very critical stage. So for all data analytics project, we will need to work on this data preparation. So for this data preparations, you will need to prep your data, like do all the cleansings and whether a data transformations is needed. So in this phase, basically, we can say that we spend around 80 to 90% of our time working on these data preparations. So after we do our data preparations, now we come to this predictive modeling and starting to do predictions if you are doing all these data science projects. So you need to plan like how to predict something, build your model. So this stage, you will need to build all this model. You do planning on testing your model as well, and then tuning your parameter, whether your values included is correct or not. And then after that, you will come to this stage, we call it evaluations. So in evaluation, basically is your team, you need to evaluate whether the models that you have already built, whether it reach a certain standard that you have already defined. So usually the first round, it won't reach your expectations. Maybe it's not that accurate or it haven't reached the expectations. So during these evaluations, we will need to go through it again and again to see whether we need to do on our data preparations again and all this. So we will need to verify our models, get approval, and then to determine whether we should move to the next step. Yeah, so we come to the next step, which is deployment, which is also the last stage of this cycle. So the last stage is about deploying your solutions into productions. Means in a simple word, is just start using it. So with your model, then you need to start using your model. So for those data analytics projects that you are not going to do any predictions, now of course you are still able to follow this framework because for data preparations, regardless whether you are doing a data science or data analytics or any data related projects, you need to do these data preparations. And if you are doing an analytics project, which is like building a simple dashboard or monitoring on certain KPI, so meaning that in this modeling, probably you will need to focus on building a dashboard to monitor all these KPI without involving the predictions modeling part. So it is just that the activities that you are going to done in this stage is a little bit changes, but it's still able to follow this framework. And of course, you will need to evaluate whether it is correct or not. So based on this Crypts DM, we can say that it is actually a phase that is we consider iterative, because you need to keep working on it. So for any data analytics project or data science projects, you will need to keep working on it. It is not like a typical software system. Once you're done, once you gather all your requirements, once you do a testing, then you leave it there. So it is no, because for data analytics project or data science project, you need to keep getting a new data and then use the data to come up with a more decisions making metrics to monitor or help you to make decisions. So in that case, that you can see that the arrow showing is it is an iterative cycle. We will need to go back to the previous stage if that is necessary. So usually when we evaluate, then we follow that maybe there is something that I want to modify, or there's anything that I would like to add on, then you will go back to your business understanding again to understand whether it is something that you need to really work on. So this is why we call this Crypts DM, which is a cycle that is iterative. And then now we come to this stage. So just now we talk about all these data analytics projects, right? Do you notice something that is missing? It is all talking about the data cycle. You can see that from understanding the objective, come up with your plan, and then do the data cleaning, and then work on the data, come up with a predictions model, and then do a deployment, start using it, or build a dashboard to use it. And there is something that is missing. Do you realize what are the things that is being missing in the framework? You can type in the comments. What do you think? Is this framework sufficient for you to govern your data analytics project? Yeah, so you can just type it there. So type it there and then later we can have a look. So basically for those missings, right, we can see that the things that is being missing is for this Crypts DM framework, it didn't include some things we call people. It didn't involve people. It basically focused more on the data lifecycle, which is starting from the beginning and then how it moved to the next. So it didn't highlight the involvement of people, highlight the involvement of communications, highlight the involvement of the stakeholders' involvement. So how do we actually monitor it and plan it? And if we have a group of people, it's not only alone. So we have a lot of people working in a team, and every one of them having a different role and focus on different things. So which comes to the importance of this project management lifecycle. So you want to manage this data analytics project, not only focus on the data lifecycle, but you need to focus on the project management itself, which is completely manage the whole project. For a data analytics project, of course, they have an end date, they have a start date, end date, and then they have people working on it. So using that previous Crypts DM framework, it is not enough for you to work on it because the framework itself doesn't cover the monitoring part, which is the people. So you need to understand the concept of this project management lifecycle. And then after that, we go into this Agile, which is understanding how we are going to manage all these people when we have a lot of teams working and collaborate together, and you have a lot of stakeholders, which is the business user that would like to view on the predictions results, or they would like to use the same dashboard. So for project management lifecycle, the first thing is we need to define the project goals, business case, and who are the people that's being involved. So you can see that this stage, initial stage, is similar, is exactly the things that is being mentioned in the previous framework, which is more on the business understanding. So it is initiation phase. So after this initiation phase, we move to the planning, which if we start to do a planning, a proper plan, like when this project needs to be started, and then who are the people that's going to involve, do we need to include additional role to manage a certain part of your data analytics project? Because you need to remember, if you are one or two people working on a data analytics project or in-house project, so it is easy for you to manage using the previous framework. But for a project which is involve multiple people, then you need to understand the phase itself. So when we come back to these project management life cycles, we have initiations, which is the one that we mentioned, the business understanding. And then planning also is involved in the business understanding compared to the previous Crypts DM. We are talking about coming up with a proper plan and then state down everything. And then after that, we will start to work on the executions, which is managing all the resources. How many people do I need in my data analytics project? If you have a very huge scope of data analytics project, then probably you are not only involving one or two people. You are involving a lot of people in this. So you need to plan how many resources is needed. And then of course, in you work on these data analytics projects, you will need to fix those issues that you have faced across this whole project. And then the next phase will be on monitoring, basically to monitor every project progress, every stage, and then to prevent any changes on the of course, we will try to prevent the changes on our scope, but because of the agility, so we need to accept, we need to adapt the new changes. So in the monitoring and controls, we need to understand how are we going to handle all these new requirements. How are we going to handle? And then lastly, which is a typical one, which is a closure, handover deliverables, which is the model or the dashboards or any things that you will need to deliver at the end of the project. And of course, the main thing is to document your project learnings, which is throughout the whole project, what you have learned throughout this project. So this is the typical project management life cycle. So with this, right, you can actually see that there are quite a lot of similarities compared to the previous Crypts DM, because it also mentions about the initiations, and then it also have these things we call the closure. So in the Crypts DM, we call the deployment, which is started to use on the solutions that we have already built, basically to deploy the whole solutions, and then of course to document those lessons learned. So there have these similarities. So for those projects that is involving a lesser people, then of course that framework is enough. But what about you have a team like 5 to 11 people? How do you manage all this, and how do you keep track the communications between your team members and all this? So you need this framework, which is in project management, we call it the Agile Framework. So just now at the beginning of these sessions, we saw people that you guys have already updated right now. Like when you think of Agile, it is about fast, it's about flexible, it is about quick, and it's also involved like sprint. Sprint meaning that we have a different phase. So when we understand this project management life cycle, we starting from initiations and then to closure, basically to hand over all our items, then we need to understand what are the available methodology. So when we talk about all these at Agile, it is just one of the type of methodology. Because in project management, we have our traditional method, which is the waterfall. We have this waterfall starting from plan, create, review, and release. And then after that, we have this Agile project management method, which is work on more the Agile, adapting the changes, getting all the latest change, and how are we going to manage the customer expectations while we are still getting all the changes into our projects. And at the same time, we are focusing on our timeline. Because for project management, there are only the main three things that we need to focus, which is the scope, the scope, the things that we need to cover for the whole project, and then the budgets, how much that we need to spend on this project. When it involves resources, it is a cost already. And then when it involves time, that is a cost already. So apart from budget, then of course the time that we need to manage, because we won't allow, like, if I want to do on a data analytics project, I want to work on 6 months, then only I'm able to see something. So nowadays, we don't execute it this way because we want to have a quick result. Once we work on it, then we want to see the result. So how do we actually fulfill this requirement? So we implement this thing we call Agile project management. So at the bottom of this project timeline, you can see that for Agile project, you have all these iterative cycle, starting from plan, review, release. Once you release to your customer, you get the feedback, and then you create again, plan again, create again, review again, then release again. So from this Agile framework, you can see that we are keep getting the feedback from our customer. We are trying to understand as much as possible about our customer expectations, and we need to make sure that all these things can be released very quick. So meaning that we won't focus on a very huge scope. We break it down into a few phases. So in this, we call it a sprint. In Agile, we call it a sprint. Then within these sprints, we are able to manage a smaller scope. So once we fulfill a smaller scope, we will release to our customer. So we release to our customer to let them to start using it, and then to let them to start work on it. So of course, customer will be quite happy because the dashboards can be come up very quickly, or the predictions model can be coming out very quickly, and they are able to start using it already. And just take note that for data analytics project, we use Agile. It is not only for data analytics project. There are a lot of software projects and other projects. They are using Agile method as well, which is trying to focus on a smaller scope of things and trying to release. Release means letting the user to start working on it, to start use it. So we have a multiple release, we have a multiple testing, and we quite often we get a lot of feedback. Meaning that once we do something, we get feedback. So the reason why we need to get all this feedback very frequently is because we need to make sure that all this meet the client expectation. So this is we call it Agile project management. So just now you have already got a brief idea on how to differentiate the waterfall, which is a very sequence phases. It runs in sequence, and we have this different method. We call it Agile methodology, which is we call it Scrum in the other way. Scrum is one of the Agile methodologies. So on these slides you are seeing right now is actually the Scrum methods. So I use a very simplified framework so that everyone is able to understand why we call it plan, collaborate, and deliver. So basically for data analytics projects, we have a lot of things that we need to focus. And of course, once our system is built, we won't stop there. We will continuously enhance and we continuously get more data and try to help our decisions making process. That's why we are still trying to improve it. That's why if you are using an agile method, you are also able to keep adding a new changes. It's just like nowadays we have this COVID monitoring system that we are using, the apps. MySejahtera is the same thing. You can actually see that MySejahtera is getting all the data very quickly, and then so all the analytics, all the charts is being improved all the time. So with all this, we are actually getting more data. Then we try to improve our analytics, try to improve what are some of the charts that we haven't used before, and we try to use it and try to help us in our decision making. So, and we use Agile, we are able to get all the requirements as frequent as possible. And then, of course, you need to validate whether the requirements is suitable for your system or for your project itself. So with this Agile, to make it simple, it is just categorized into three main categories. So we can see that the first one will be on the plan. So of course, you need to do planning, right? So in the previous framework that we can see the Crypts DM. So in Crypts DMs, we have planning during our business understanding. We try to understand what are the things that user want to see, what are the things that you think that it is very important and you want to include in your system. So in Agile parts, there's a Scrum methodology. We call it a backlog. So basically, a backlog is include all the requirements. Of course, you need to prioritize which requirement go first. So basically, the first stage is to start on your planning. Start on your planning and then list out all the requirements that you think it is needed. So you list it down. So the items over here basically is the requirement that you need, the requirements. So you need to list out all the requirements that you need. And then after that, you move to the next stage. So from here, we use a very simple phase we call the collaborate. The reason why we use the collaborate because Agile, they emphasize on the customer focus. They focus on what are the things that we can do with our customer to make sure that they are happy all the time, and of course to make sure that we can release, which is we are able to use the products, to use the system as soon as possible. We don't have to wait like 6 months or 1 year, then only we are able to use on that system. So we are basically breaking down all this scope into a smaller phase. So in this collaborates, you can see the words iteration is over there because you need to keep going back like planning, create, and then review. So basically you start to do planning, which requirements you need to complete first. Then you will go to the backlog, select the items, which is the requirement that you need. Go there and select which one is really needed, and then you work on it. So on the middle part, the collaborate basically is the sprint. So we have a several sprint. So for those who are really new to these words, of course, we can understand it as a phase. We have different phase. So usually for sprint, we will group it like the durations will be 1 to 4 weeks. So we call it this time box sprint. So we have all these sprints within 1 week to 4 weeks. So it depends on how you want to plan it and how quickly you want to release this item, to release these systems or these functions to people to start using it. So in these iterations, you are keep getting the feedback once you let the user to work on it, and then you will need to refine your whole process and see whether there is any enhancement that is needed. So in these iterations, we call it a sprint, keep iterate, starting from a plan, create, review, and then update again, and then plan, review, and then again and again. So all these phases is keep going on. So you can see that the release meaning that once we finish one sprint, we will release the deliverables. So from here, the deliverables can be anything that is being done by your team. So for example, a dashboard to view all the charts, to view all the things, or it can be a report based on your requirements. You need to generate a report with all the API that is needed. So in that, you can actually call it a deliverables. Then you will need to get a feedback. So do you notice that there is a very critical thing in this Agile methodology, which is we call it a daily review. So basically for this daily review, we are actually getting the feedback from our team itself, which is from the data analytics team. Can be your data science team or any data team, the deliverables, which is that have already done by your team members, the developers that's being involved in this whole project. So you have this daily review, basically a very quick sessions that's being done by your team, within your team. And of course, if you want to involve your customers, you can involve. So basically to make sure that the progress is keep going, it's a very quick update. It will just take around 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes on reviewing what are the things that you need to do. So this is, we call it a daily review, basically to make sure that the whole project is keep working on it. Yeah, then we talk about this agile methodologies, right? You will need to keep reminding yourself that there is 5 essential attributes for an agile project. So what are the 5 essential attributes? Because when we look at the previous charts, right, we are talking about we keep planning and then we start listing down all our requirements, and then we keep going back to see whether data preparation is needed. Is it something wrong with my objective? Do I need to refine it, or do I need to add on a new business objective to actually cater my needs? So basically, this process is an iterative process. It is keep rolling and keep enhancing. So this is something we call the agile, which is quick, very quickly. We come up with something that is able to use, And then flexible, we are able to get new requirements whenever we realize that there is something that is really needed. So we are able to set the priority, which one need to do first or which one need to do next. So when we work on these agile projects, you will notice that these 5 attributes is very important. So the first one is about transparency, because transparency is about for everyone in your team to understand your process, understanding your whole data analytics process. So you need to let everyone also aware that what is our current stage, including your customers, because you will need to let them to use on your dashboard or use on the things that you have already produced. So in data analytics project, transparency is very important if you are using this agile project management method. And then after that, you will work into customer focus. So when we talk about customer focus, it is just as simple as you need to ensure that all your customers' expectation is being captured. So you will need to understand what their needs, and based on what their needs, you will need to keep getting a feedback. So you can see that if we are using an agile project management method, we are actually keep communicate with our customers, communicate with them, and then we will try to get their feedback. Is it something that you want has already generated, or is it something that you suddenly realize that it is very important but we didn't capture at the beginning of the stage? So this is required customer focus. And then the next item, the next attribute will be adaptability, which is all about how flexibility you are getting the new requirement. You need to adapt to the environment, which is this kind of agile environment. Because in nowadays we have a requirement keep coming in. Of course, for data analytics project, it will be more frequent compared to maybe some of the projects that you guys have working on. So for data analytics project, maybe now I want to see this KPI, but maybe next round I want to see other things. So just like how you use a mindset Jatara, now I want to see a hotspot. So I want to see which location has a lot of people being diagnosed as COVID positive. And maybe next round you want to see as a state level. You want to see the total COVID cases for each of the state. So this is a new requirement which is you need to enhance in your system. So when you use this kind of agile, you will need to communicate with your customer, get the new requirement, and then start to implement it. So of course, if you want to control the scope of your project, you will need to prioritize it. It is not that once I get the requirement, then I work on it. So you actually need to have a proper plan, like which one is important, then I work on it first. Which one it is not really important, then I work on it later. Then of course the next attribute is about a share ownership. So the share ownership is we encourage people to voice up their concern. It is not only the customer side able to voice up, but of course your data analytic team, which is your data team, your developers, they will actually need to understand more about all these requirements, and then they'll need to have this courage to voice out. Is it something additional that you think that is need to be done to actually have a better decisions making process? So share ownership is about highlighting the collaborations needed between the customer and the developer. So basically the data team. We need to take ownership so that you also think that if I'm the one who are using this dashboard, if I'm the one who are using this system, do I need to does it sufficient for your decisions making? Do you need to enhance it, or do you think that there is any other way to present this result in a better way? So this is we have this concept called share ownership. We don't need to wait until the project managers don't need to wait until the customer raise up what needs to be done. Then you need to brainstorm within your internal team. What are the things that you can do in advance to actually make this whole thing to get better? And then the last stage will be a continuous improvement. Because when we use all this agile, we are about saying quick, small scope, then we are keep getting the results, which is we are highlighting the flexibility. So you need to keep improve. Once you release something, then you need to get the feedback and try to enhance on it. So this is we call the 5 essential attributes for all the Agile project management. So at this stage, any questions from the floor? So you can actually write down and then can discuss it later. Yeah, so just now we talk about all these Agile methods, right? Then how do we actually manage our projects if we involve a lot of people? And then if you want to monitor what are the requirements that have already done, what have not, and what will be the next thing that we need to do in the future. So for Agile project management, usually we will build this kind of a board. We call it a Kanban board. So this is a very simple board that basically keep track all the requirements that we need to do. And now, of course, we can separate into different phases. But this one is about keep tracking all the requirements and then keep track all the progress of your analytics project. So you will need to write down all the backlog. So the backlog over here is about all the requirement that you need to do. So you can see that on the right hand side, there is something we call a user stories, which is the requirement. Whether it can be done or it cannot be done, or is it a defect that you need to fix. So all the backlog is keep tracking all the requirements. So it seems goes to a data analytic project. You have a lot of requirements like I want to monitor the total cases in certain state. I want to have a look on the summary at which level. I want to monitor this KPI. I want to monitor that KPI. So all this is called a requirement, what you want to do, what you want to predict. Do you want to predict like maybe next month, what is the sales of a certain products? So all this is the requirement that you need to do. Then you need to keep track in your backlog. And then you can see on the next one is to do. What you need to do, what you need to develop, then what you need to work on testing, whether you have already tested on that item. And then of course, the last one we call the deployment, which is we start to deploy the solutions into your productions, which is start using it. And then decide whether it is something that's already good to go. And then if everything is okay, then we will move it to done. So basically, this is a Kanban board for you to monitor all the requirement status, to keep track all the project status. Yeah, then we have come to this project management tools. So just now we talked about like we have this Kanban board to actually monitor it. But how do we actually monitor it? Do we use a paper and pen to do it? Then of course no, right? So we use all these system. You can call it a web-based project management tools to actually help you to work on it. So from the screen, you can see that these are some of the tools that I have been using for monitoring different type of analytics project. So we have this Trello, Asana, Notions. So all these 3 project management tools, we call it a task-based. So when we call task-based, meaning that it is very simple to understand. We just create something and then you just need to set a deadline and all this. So it is a task-based. It is not that technical. You don't need to integrate to any coding or anything. So it is easy to use and you can use it for monitoring your daily life activities as well, or you want to use it for your own self to keep track certain things. So Trello, Asana, Notion, it is kind of tools that is easy to use. But when we come to something that is a bit technical that you need to integrate with your operations, like you want to communicate with your developers in terms of make sure the codings have already synced to the productions, it's a little bit technical, then you need to use this Azure DevOps or Jira. So these are the 2 popular tools for a lot of project management team to use on monitoring the project progress in terms of whether this item have already fixed or whether the items is still pending for the team to look into it and decide whether it is something that they need to work on straight away or they can pending first to work on some items that has a higher priority. So this is we call these two project management tools basically have two types of tools. One is a task-based and another one we call it DevOps. And Jira, which is more on the technical side, for you to integrate with your GitHub, to integrate with your coding, is a little bit details and a little bit technical. So if you just want to monitor high levels, want to monitor a task base, then you use Trello, you do Trello, Asanas also can, and then Notions. And then of course there are a lot of project management tools available in the market. So you can have a look as well. There are some of it like Monday, also one of the tools that you can use. So this is some of the example. Yeah, so before we move to these slides, you can have a look on this item. Yeah, so you can see that this example is like to do, work in progress, and done. So basically, these are the things that you can monitor. What are the things that I need to do if I have a data qualities projects or I have a data analytics project? What I need to do, I need to check on the data quality. I need to work on the baseline, whether my model needs to be refined, and then so whether I need to work on it. And then these are the things that you can list it down and collaborate with your team members. And then of course, with the WIP, work in progress, what are the things that they are currently working on, refining the model. And lastly, what is considered have already done, which is analyze demographic by zip code or anything that you have already done is probably the dashboard that you have already done. So basically a task-based project management tools able to keep track all these main things, and you can keep track on any other project as well. So this is the task-based management tools. So any questions before we proceed on our last part? So our last part will be conclusions on how we are going to use this, because just now we learned about the Crypts DM, right? So now we have a look on this Crypts DM. So in these Crypts DMs, just now we learned about all these stage, starting from a business requirement, data understanding, data preparations, modeling, evaluations, and deployment. So these are the phase that we can see that it is iterative. When we get something, then we need to move on the next phase. So with this, right, just now we do take note that there are something already is not being covered in this framework, which is managing the team. Because if you are just alone or if you are one or two person working on data analytics project, this framework is enough for you to keep track the whole data analytics project, starting from the requirements, business requirement, and then to the deployment. But what if you are having a team of people like around 5 to 11%, and you have different role that you need to identify? So this comes to the importance of this agile project management. You need to understand the end-to-end project. You need to plan on your resource. So what are some of the resource that you think that is very important on certain role, that someone that can work on? So if you have a team of people around 5 to 11 or more than that, so you will need to add on, which is using an agile project management method to actually keep track the phase. Keep track the phase. The phase means that every sprint. So what are the things that you need to do? Like for example, a typical data analyst projects, we have all these project manager, project sponsor, and then we have this business user and business analyst. So in our business understanding stage, these two persons is being involved, business user and business analyst. And then after that is when we move on to data understanding, which is something that we already gather the data and we need to work on the data preparations. We need to prepare the data for a modeling or to understand all this. So you have a data engineer or a data quality engineer to actually check on the data quality, and of course to do all the transformations of your data. So you have another person, which is a different role to actually keep track and work on it. So of course, this is a bigger data analytics project. So if you are having a smaller analytics project, then maybe you don't need that much that many of people. Maybe you just need around 1 to 2 people. So here we are showing that there are many people that's involved in different stage. And then you can see that there is one role we call the system architect, which is someone who are understanding all your infrastructures and help you to plan your data analytics projects. What are some of the infra that is needed, that is required? What are some of the new software that you need to install, or what are some of the things that is required, the whole system? So system architect is someone that's helping you to plan out all this. So if you have this role, you will need to plan your whole analytics project. You will need to plan it properly in terms of the resource required for that project and who are the persons that is being involved in different stage. And then when it comes to a data modeling, evaluations and deployments, and of course, you will need to have these analysts or data scientists to actually help you to build your own dashboard or any metrics or any KPI that you need to monitor on your reports. So these are the persons that is helping, that is involved in this modeling, evaluation, deployment. And of course, they won't work alone because they will need to collaborate with other team as well, which is they will need to collaborate with a data engineering team to understand the data. So most of the time, this role can be one person, which is someone who will work on the data preparations, also work on this modeling and building the dashboard. But of course, if you have a very huge scope of your data analytics projects, you will need to segregate this scope, which is different people in charge on different things. So with all this, how are you going to manage it if you just understand about Crypts DM model? So you will need to adapt this agile project management. You will need to understand all these things can be planned according to different sprint, which is around 1 to 4 weeks. And every time you can work on a smaller scopes. So this is something that we can actually work on to plan out a whole end-to-end data analytics projects. That's why we show that this is the examples, which is we have a to-do, work in progress, and done. So this is a use cases that you can see that. So just now we have already roughly go through. So these are the things that we can actually focus on, which is starting on the planning. We have already decided who are the persons. So of course, if you are using Trello, Asana, or any other project management tools, all these tasks, you can actually assign a person, which is you are able to keep track which are the requirements that have not been done, and then which are the requirements that have already done, and it's or some of the items that is currently working in progress. So these are the three things. At least these are the three things that you can monitor. But of course, if you have more phases or more stage that you need to keep track on the progress, then you can add on. So these are some things that you can actually explore. So at this moment, any others things that you feel that you're confused or you have already working on this kind of a method on your current data analytics project. So feel free to drop a message so that we can discuss it together. So basically, for the challenges that we manage all different kinds of data analytics project, most of the time it will be a data issues because conducting all these data analytics or data science project, it really takes time and it is not that easy if you are working as a team because everyone has different role. So if you want to have a successful data analytics project, of course, you need to have a proper planning. And then you will need to have a comprehensive project scopes. And of course, we have a sophisticated framework to actually act as a guideline for you to work on that particular project. To work on a particular project. So these are some of the common things that we can take note. Then of course the challenges will be on the data sides because we don't know whether the data is in good quality or not. So the data part is the main thing. So apart from the data side, then of course the persons within your team, the data team, whether they are able to understand all this flow, because they will need to collaborate together and work on this together. So in Agile, the first thing is to understand will be it is just a methodology for us to understand how to close the gap between our customer and the developer, which is the data team, how they are going to work it together to make sure that all the requirement that is being captured at the initial stage can be worked on it, and then we need to come up with a proper plan. So basically to set the time. So Agile project management is helping us to understand how to set the time, how to separate all these requirements into different sprints. Yeah, how to segregate all this into different sprints so that we are able to understand more about all these end-to-end projects. Yeah, if you have any other questions, you can actually type it, and we can go through it together. What are the challenges, and are you already start working on this kind of framework? Yeah, I saw the questions saying that how to plan a sprint, how big a module should be used. So usually when we plan a sprint, right, we will need to consider how big is your modules. So first you need to evaluate the scope that you need to focus. And then of course for sprints, the durations is around 1 week to 4 weeks. So usually for sprint, it won't exceed 4 weeks. So within 1 week, what are the things that you can work on? Because usually when we want to work on data analytics projects, 1 week is too less because we don't have enough time to understand all the requirements and then start to gather all the data. So in that cases, usually at least you need to allocate around 2 to 3 weeks. At least you spend a few days on the requirement gathering, and then after that you need to gather the data, see what are the data that is needed, and then start to build on something, maybe a very first draft, first versions of your dashboard or first versions of your model to actually do on a predictions. So the gap will be between the 2 to 4 weeks. So in terms of the modules, you will need to define how large is your module, how many data that's being involved. So usually when we talk about the scope, we will need to think of how many data set is being involved, the data. And then of course, there is another thing, it will be the requirements, which is how many people giving you the requirements, how many stakeholders is being involved in this project. So in that case, from the data side, you are able to define, how long is the sprint is needed based on the data sets, how many data sets, 2 data sets or 3 data sets, which is the source of your data, and then how to define how many users, how many people are trying to use this product after you generate it. So in that case, you can decide how long is a sprint and then how many modules that you need to put within a sprint. Yeah, so I hope I answers Yao Jing questions. And then I have another question from Barry Oi. So it's saying that in a typical data analytics project, what proportions of time is spent on the data cleaning and how much data is usable from the original? So in terms of the data that is usable from the original, it depends on the data that's being collected. So for example, I work on some of the government projects, and then I do work on food and beverage projects, manufacturing project. It depends on how they collect the data, because from what we can see, right, most of them are still at the very beginning stage, meaning that they have a very not very dirty data, but the data itself is not very clean, and some of them the data is not enough for us to do a prediction. So in that case, right, for a data analytic projects, we won't do any predictions. maybe we just focus on a descriptive. So in terms of how much data is usable, it really depends. So usually we have sessions, we call it feasibility sessions, to go through with our customer to look at their data. How many data is usable? Is it in a proper standard that we can straight away use it? Or do we need to go through a very complex data transformations or data cleaning? So it really depends on how they collect data. And then in terms of the proportions of time, it also depends as well. Because for our typical data analytics projects, we can do it without 1 or 2 months, within 1 or 2 months. So within 1 or 2 months, we are able to keep track all this data, and then we are able to identify within 1 or 2 months. Then we spend around 4 weeks to work on the data cleaning. So the timeline is actually defined by your data analytic teams. So we don't have a very specific answer for that because it is all depends on how many data that is being involved. So in a simple word, it's like how many data source that is being involved. So if you have just one source, maybe one source is straight away from a system, a database, it is already structured and the data quality is very good and we don't need to spend much time on the data cleaning and transformations, then in that case, we can just allocate around 1 to 2 weeks focus on the data cleaning. Yeah. So we don't have a very specific, but if you want to have an accurate answers, usually we will have a planning at the very beginning stage, which is at the project initiations part. We will actually need to understand how many sources, the cleanliness of your data. Usually you need to have a first have a look on the data. And of course, the most important thing is to communicate with your customers because they are the subject matter expert. You will need to understand with this set of data, how are we going to utilize it? So from the conversations, then we will have next sessions to identify the durations, the proportions needed to do on the data cleansing. So usually we'll allocate like maybe 2 sources, then we will spend around like 2 weeks or 3 weeks to work on that. Depends on the size and depends on the source of the data. And then we have another questions from the floor, also from Yanjing Quack. So it is asking about what should we do if a sprint module can't finish? It is better to just proceed to the next task and keep fight to the end. Yeah, so this is a very interesting questions, and it's a very common problems that we face every day and in every project. So usually we face this kind of situations. We won't stop it and proceed to the next sprint. So what we do is for the sprint planning, you notice that from the previous charts, we talk about some things like this. We have a plan, collaborate, and deliver, right? So in this stage, we will go through the items once our sprint is complete. So meaning that in the middle portion, the collaborate, one I release to our customers and I work on it and I get feedback and I do a revise. And then I realize that the sprint is already completed, which is I initially allocate 2 weeks. But now I just realized that, 2 weeks is already finished. And what should I do if my module is not complete? So the next thing that you need to do is you go back to your plan stage, which is at the first stage, at the plan stage. You need to prioritize. So for the Agile methods, you will need to prioritize your item. So to see what are the things that you need to do, is the module that you haven't complete, is it still important for you to complete by maybe next week or next 2 weeks? So basically, you will need to prioritize it to see which are the things that is really important. So you prioritize that and then you decide, is it something that you really need to work on? If it is something that you really need to work on, then in that case, in your new sprint, because remember, our sprint is always defined as within 1 week to 4 weeks. So what I can do is I can allocate another sprint, which is around 2 weeks to 4 weeks. Then from that, I can actually define. So I will need to work on the previous sprint. So basically, you will bring forward those remaining items to the new sprint. So this is how we plan it for every sprint. So for every time, if we can't finish certain things, we will need to reprioritize it. So this is the main things. We need to reprioritize all these items. So just remember that for all the projects, regardless whether you are using a waterfall management method or regardless you are using an agile methodology methods, you will need to set a deadline for your project. Because for every project, of course, they have a deadline, right? It won't be like my whole data analysis project, I work on it for like 1 year and I still see nothing and it can't help in decisions making. So we need to set a date for every sprint. So usually what I do is we set around 2 to 4 weeks for every sprint. So every sprint completed, we will need to go back to the plan again and then to look at the plan whether these items still need to work on it. So if it is not rushed and the item can be stopped first because it is not important or we are not able to proceed because of the data availability, then in that case you can pause it for like maybe after 1 or 2 sprints you go back it again. So in these methodologies, we can see a backlog basically to keep track all these requirements. Those items that haven't completed and it needs to complete by the end of the project dates, we will need to go back to the backlog. And then for every sprint, I will need to reprioritize it. So just to remember for Agiles, we are about prioritizing the requirements. We are about improving our customer satisfaction level so that we need to get the feedback from them very frequent. Yeah, so I hope these answers helped you in making your next data analytics project more successful. And of course, for all the data analysis projects, we need to have this kind of method, these two methods to work on it together. So not only understanding the data lifecycle, you will need to understand how to manage a whole team, especially when you have different roles in your team. So it is a combination of Crypts DM and the Agile methodologies. It's actually work best for all your data analytics project. And I hope these methods helps you to enhance on your next project process. And of course, for your team to understand more about how to kickstart. Yeah, and most importantly, it involves a lot of communications. So the main thing is you really need to communicate with your customers and of course with your team as well. So your team need to communicate, even though you guys are in the same team, you need to discuss which item, which module you need to work on it. If you can't finish, is it able to proceed or is it able to put it there first, which is pending, on hold the item, and then work on the next item, which is have a higher priority. So these are all the things that we need to communicate throughout the project. And of course, the last thing is to keep track the lesson learned. So we need to write down all the information that is needed. Yeah, keep track all the informations. Yeah, thanks, Yao Jing. Yeah, I hope that is really helpful. So any questions before we end the sessions? So basically, this webinar is give you a heads up on how to manage a data analysis project with a combination of a Crypts DM model with understanding a data lifecycle, and of course, in a project management perspective, using this agile planning all the stage. Yeah, thanks, Barry, for your 5 stars. And what about others? I hope that you gain something throughout this webinar and start to implement. If there's anything, do send me an email, then I can reply you if you need any help.